Okay, we are live. Give me a second here to finish getting this here in the right direction. And I am just going to take a moment here in just a second. Okay. Okay. All right. We are live on the radio and we are on YouTube. And it is November 13th, 2024. And this is Politics, the Pulpit, and the Pew. We're going to talk about a few things today that are happening. And one of the first things, obviously, is we had the election last week. I did last week's. It was pre-programmed. And then I did, or actually, it wasn't pre-programmed, but I ended up deleting that or moving that to private for a couple of different reasons. But post-election headlines, when you just go through some of the headlines, you see several things where there's blaming this person or that person for the loss. There are people that are talking about the potential of disrupting Trump's agenda. And you have to imagine that just about any one of these things could happen in regards to trying to interrupt the Trump agenda. And the reason I say that is because if you just primarily stop and think a moment on how hard they fought against him getting into the office and winning the office, how much they tried to keep him from even being on the ticket. If you think those same people are going to give up easily or just roll over and play dead and we just have to accept this, you're mistaken. I think that it may not have gotten started yet, but it will begin soon, guaranteed. Just pay attention. The reason that I say that is because when Trump got elected the first time, the hatred for what he was doing was so strong. I have never seen anything like that in a presidential candidate and president in my lifetime, where the perception and the treatment from the media was so bad and just so vitriolic from the beginning of their programs to the end of them, all the way through. They just could not. It seemed like they just could not get over it or just let it go. And there was nothing that he could do that was any good. And when you stop and you think about where we are at in history at this present time, we're at a time where the globalist agenda, and we had President Biden talking about a new world order. There's a lot of things that are at stake here. And there is this, we know, as a Bible-believing Christian, we know that there is a movement towards a global government. Why do you think that they continue to have the open border down there that they did? Because if you don't have a border, you don't have nations. If you break down American sovereignty, then you open the door, you open the potential for America to submit or be resigned to a global government and more submitted to the United Nations, if you will. Now, one of the things that pay attention to sometimes is the treaties that they want the Senate to ratify. And there's been several that have come up. You want to talk about the importance of having a Republican Senate. That is one of the issues and one of the very, very important reasons to have a Republican Senate, or at least a close enough Senate where you would have maybe a couple of defectors from the Democrat Party, because they live in states where they would come under a lot of pressure if they were going to sign away United States sovereignty to a treaty. So that's important. Now, one of the other things, Trump did meet with President Biden today, and they spent just under 2 hours today, and apparently it seemed to have gone well. There is, at least on the surface, there is the discussion that it will be a smooth transition. And so and I pray that that happens. And it's nice to see the cabinet appointments that Trump is making. One of the ones that makes me feel very positive is Mike Huckabee as an ambassador to Israel. He's a guy that has some pastoral background. He has some Bible knowledge, and he has an understanding from a biblical perspective the value of America's relationship with Israel. And that is a tremendous blessing to have him in that position. And some of the other cabinet members that he's chosen are chosen specifically so that when he takes office, they can go through the approval process and they can get right busy and begin doing the things that they need to do in straightening some things out. We've had some bad leadership in those positions for the last 4 years. And so there's a little bit of work to do. There's a little bit of cleanup that has to be done. Now, one of the things that you think about the demographics of the voters, and there was more young men that voted for Trump. The young vote got out in favor of Trump, and especially the young males. Now, why is that important? And it's because they recognized what was happening, and they recognized the pickle that the previous administration put us into. They recognized the freedoms that were taken from them, the lockdowns, the different controls, and then the trying to pacify us with, well, it's for a good reason, it's for health reasons, when it was very obvious by the time we were 3 to 4 months into the COVID scenario that there were positions that were being exploited for the purpose of bringing people under control, and just it was just a crazy time. But these younger voters, they recognize that. They also see that the cost of everything has skyrocketed, and they recognize that they have less money in their pockets because of that, and they're keenly aware of that. And so they voted in response to that. But I think there's also a backlash that is taking place because of the woke agenda. They have seen some of their own classmates, some of the young people that voted this year, they grew up. They were in high school when COVID happened. They've seen some of the transgender issues up front and personal. They've dealt with some of that very much on a frontline basis with people they knew, and they saw it, and they came away from that. And I have a young man that I visited with a few times, and I've heard it several times referenced that this next generation that's coming up is more conservative than the last couple generations that preceded it. And I don't know if it's Gen Z plus or whatever it is, this next generation, that's the young adults that were voting this past election, that voted in favor of Trump. Now, one of the other things that was also a very interesting, you want to talk about an interesting demographic that voted for Harris. And now, when I tell you this, it was college educated people making 6 figures plus, if I remember the detail correctly, 6 figures. So you're making over $100,000 a year. They are in a different category financially than most people. Let me give you an example. Here in Jamestown, I believe that the median income is still around $40,000 to $45,000. So if you're making over $100,000, you are more than twice the median income of Jamestown, North Dakota. So why is that important? Well, because during this last campaign and over the last couple of years, there has been an attempt to alleviate them from the financial debt of going to college. Now, they went to college, they have their college degrees, and they're making 6 figures, and they can't pay their loans back. Well, so they vote for the candidate that wanted to help alleviate that pressure. Well, they haven't been unburdened from what they were under, I guess. So Kamala didn't come through. So now, do I feel bad about that? No. If they went to college, they worked hard, but they borrowed the money. It's not the government's responsibility to pay it back. It's not the government's responsibility to alleviate that. People have done this for years. Let me tell you about my dad. My dad went to college went to tech school to get a trade back in the early 70s, and he had 6 kids. He worked a full-time job and a part-time job, and he went to school full-time while he did that. And it was during a time where he needed to provide for his family, but he did it. And so, yeah, it can be done. It's hard work, but Americans need to get back to recognizing hard work is necessary if you're going to get somewhere in life. You have to get up in the morning and you have to be disciplined and you have to do the things that you need to do, and you have to be diligent about that. So I just think that is kind of an interesting demographic of the voters that I just thought I'd throw a little commentary on that. But one of the things that happened to me recently, and I'm going to make some comments about some things locally and dealing with the woke agenda and some activists that are in this area. And I know some of them, and they're nice people. But here's what I want to tell you. There has been some issues dealing with banned books, and I have a list here, and it's from the ACLU. You can probably go on their site, check it out. Most feared books in North Dakota. Now, if I just read through the titles of these, and I did this, I should have highlighted some of them, but here's some of the titles. Listen to this. I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica L. Sanchez. What is that? I mean, what's the purpose of that? Here's another one. Naked, Not Your Average Sex Encyclopedia. Why does this book need to be in a children's section? And here's the thing. The problem that I have is that people have tried to make the activists on the left have tried to make you look like you're a dumb bunny and you just want to censor free speech by keeping these books out of the kids section. No, what does a book Naked, Not Your Average Sex Encyclopedia need to be in a children's section? And how much money should you spend to get that out of there? This is something that I mean, that's just a few of these titles. There's several other ones. Queer ducks. I mean, okay, I have never seen a queer duck. I used to go duck hunting and never saw a couple of queer ducks. Never saw. I mean, you used to see the mallards swimming around in the pond. They'd fly together, swim together, go out to eat together. But I never seen queer ducks. Okay, because queer ducks don't reproduce, and we've got more ducks now than we did when I used to go hunting as a kid. There's like millions of more ducks. It's crazy how many more you can shoot just going out on a weekend nowadays. So that's a nutty book, I mean, and who would take the time? You got to think about the mind of a person that would write something like that. So I have this list here, and there's several of them. It's like this whole long page here of books. It's from the ACLU. If you don't know anything about the ACLU, they present themselves as standing up for the liberties, but really they are an organization that is far left, progressive, and they argue for anything that is just almost obscene, and they'll fight for those causes. And so, but I wanted to just tell you, this thing here is maybe the most feared books in North Dakota, but I'm gonna tell you what the most feared book is. This one right here. It's the Bible, and you have to stop and think about how hard they're trying to keep the Bible out of the public schools down in Oklahoma and Louisiana, and how they went from they went against the Jim Barrett because he wanted to have the Ten Commandments back in the public schools, just the Ten Commandments. And you stop and think about this and how they've gotten God kicked out of the public schools. Well, you seem like you just can't get over that. No, I can't, because it's part of the reason why we are where we are in our country today, is because the moral conditions began to slide beginning in the 60s after they booted God out of the public schools. You cannot deny that in modern history, contemporary history, the moral slide, the sexual revolution that took place following that, and the cultural slide that has taken place. So why is having God in the public school so important? Because it just simply makes people aware that there is a God and a life hereafter. If you're God conscious, you'll be more mindful of what's right and what's wrong. And so that's why it's important to do that. And it was the far left that has worked very diligently to get him out of the public schools. and then they want to turn around and make you look bad because you don't want certain books. So the most feared book is the Bible. That's why communist countries close the doors to it. That's why socialist activists in Jamestown, North Dakota will get fired up about books being banned, but then turn around and not want the Bible in the public school because they fear that book. Now, I have one other thing that I want to mention, and then there is an organization in Jamestown. It's called the Stutsman County Human Rights Coalition. They're nice people. Don't get me wrong. They're nice people. You go shake their hands, they'll say hello, they'll have a nice conversation with you, but they're activists. And as activists, their agenda is woke. They have a purpose. Now, they started in 2021. And starting in 2021, they want to push for all the things that they're just part of that woke agenda. Now, there are some of those things that are very plainly just against the Bible. Now, here's what makes it interesting. There are a couple of pastors that are a part of this group. And so you have to ask yourself, do those guys even believe the Bible? Because they turn around and deny it. It's not a matter of interpretation. It's just a matter of reading it and receiving it. So it's not about interpretation. It's about reading it and receiving it as it was given. It's about opening your eyes and just looking at reality as it is, biology as it is. That without heterosexuality, there's no reproduction and there's no continuing of the human race. And that's how God set it up to be. God set it up, man and a woman in the covenant of marriage. God did not set it up Joe and Schmo and whichever way he wants to go. He set it up as a man and a woman in the covenant of marriage and for the purpose of procreation. And so I think that's important. This organization, I will give you, I have a little book here. It's called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And when you read this, there are 23 amendments. And what they're doing, they're copycatting off our Bill of Rights and so on and so forth. And I get that. It's a nice way to line things out. But this is basically the adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. Now, what I find interesting when I read these amendments, I find it interesting that you can read through them, and some of them are not entirely bad. But when you read through it and you see the wording, and you know what it really comes down to? Treating someone with dignity. Well, when we established the Constitution, there were some things that were stated plainly about natural law, nature's God, and those are the things that, if you understand the Declaration of Independence, they're biblical in nature. And the Bible teaches us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and then to love your neighbor as yourself. And so by booting God out of the public school, and then the decline of Christianity in America, it's not a good thing. It's not a positive thing. But I guarantee this Declaration of Human Rights, you know what I find missing in here? Any mention of God. So what you have is a secular morality. And when you have a secular morality, who determines what's right and wrong? Who's the standard of right and wrong? Who's the one that made the rules of right and wrong? Now, this was obviously it was generally accepted and put together, but the bottom line is it eliminates God from the equation. And that right now is the biggest problem in America, is that God is not part of the public equation. But there is some good things on the horizon. I don't know if you've seen this, but Donald Trump is promoting a Bible that has the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. And when you begin to do a little bit of study, what you'll find out is that the book of Deuteronomy in the Old Testament was very influential in the founders' lives. And they reference that. And the moral laws of Israel. You know what the moral laws were? The moral laws in Israel, it was civil law, national law, and it was based on the 10 Commandments. And what God did when he established them, he gave them the 10 Commandments, and then he gave them the civil laws that they were supposed to follow. And as they were going to follow those commandments, he gave them the civil laws. And what those civil laws are explanations of how the commandments work in treating one another. And so you see, God did give some really good principles on how to treat one another, how a government should be set up. And so when the founders founded at the beginning of America, and they were well-versed in the Bible, they were well-versed in Blackstone's commentary, which is the source of law, and it was full of scripture. It made it so that they founded us on Judeo-Christian values. So the difficulty with accepting something like this today, knowing what our history was, is it comes back to this. They booted God out of the public arena. But Donald Trump has openly said that Jesus Christ is King of Kings. And you know what? I also heard him say he's not. He was. I'm not going to try to compete with. No way. Jesus Christ. You see, John Lennon made that comment that he was more popular than Jesus Christ, and it wasn't too long after that, I think he got whacked. But here's the thing: Donald Trump recognizes that Jesus is the King. That's a big deal in America today, because Jesus is the King of Kings. This is politics, the pulpit, and the pew, and giving a Bible opinion on things that are happening, and having a right perspective is only going to happen if you have a biblical worldview of life and reality and what happens after this life. That's the only way that that's possible. And I'm going to make one more story here as I finish up today's program. I was going into a place of business this last week, and there was a local pastor, and he was on the more liberal side of it, and I was cutting across the parking lot, and I was a few steps ahead of him, but I turned around and I made a casual mention of the election last Tuesday. And I was, and I just made a comment. I said, it was an interesting day. It wasn't a comment that was to the right or to the left. It wasn't in favor. It wasn't against. It was a very neutral comment. I said, it was an interesting day. And here's the thing, watching the election total still being counted in some states because they have some bad laws on counting in elections, and they need to correct them. Hopefully they will, but probably not, because one of them is California, the other one's Arizona. But anyways, so nonetheless, I made the comment. It was an interesting day. And he just came almost unhinged. It was a terrible day. It was a terrible, terrible day. And I was like taken aback. And so I kind of chuckled lightly, trying to downplay it. And then he got even more intense. It was a terrible day, and it's not a laughing matter. And I looked back as I was opening the door, and I said, I'm sorry that you can't see. But here's the thing that I do wonder. And at some point in time, I will cross paths with them again. We're a smaller community, but and I'm not naming who it is, but I wonder, do you even believe the Bible is the Word of God? To be able to hold on to the positions, morally speaking, that you do. Now, I can get a little bit, understanding, politics, you might get a little confused, but morally confused and whatnot. And I know that he's very much in support of abortion, and that's where I just have a difficulty with this. Listen, the guy he's doing his thing. He just because he's a pastor doesn't make him any better than anybody else, but he ought to know better. And the sad thing is that he sits in a position in a church where probably I don't know how many people go to the church, but he's in a position of influence, and his influence is going the wrong direction against the word of God. And so that's my concern. We're at a place in America where we need a return to God, and what that's going to look like is anybody that professes to be a Christian, and I'm sure he professes to be a Christian because he's a pastor. Why wouldn't he? But he's going the wrong way. And Second Chronicles 7:14 says, "If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face," and then it says, "and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and heal their land." That's the promise of God. If my people, who are my people? The ones that call themselves Christians, at least the ones that at least try to identify, but whether he is or isn't, I'm not the judge of that, but I do know this. His emotional disposition that was affected by the election should not have been that dramatic, and the election should not have been that traumatic to him. And I'll explain to you this, because I have been through when Obama got elected. Was I disappointed. When Bill Clinton got elected, man, was I disappointed. But did I act like it was a terrible, terrible day? No, I was disappointed. Did I have great emotional trauma? No, I was disappointed because we got a president that was going to take us in the wrong direction, morally speaking, and they did. And so it wasn't something that when he got this dramatic that was it was not it just wasn't necessary. And here's what I'm trying to get at. You see, as a Bible believing Christian, we ought to be able to accept, whether we like it or not, who the president is. And whether we liked Joe Biden as president or not, he was our president, and God allowed it. You see, that's the bottom line. God allowed it. And as a Christian, I recognize that. And once you recognize the situation, what it is, you also will recognize that at the end of the day, you've got to figure out how you're going to navigate this. And if you're just going to go on tantrums every time somebody says something about what happened in this past election, that's you're not going to get very far. Not with somebody that has some understanding of the Bible and recognizes that, there are things that happen in this world, and we may not always like them. But if we understand that God allows things, that will help us to accept those things, whether we like them or not. Now, here's what I do understand. Prophetically speaking, there is a globalist government coming. And I recognize that there are some things happening. I am going to talk about some things prophetically speaking in some upcoming sessions, because I pay attention to prophecy and I try to have a good sense of prophecy. And I do think that we are on the cusp of something possibly happening. But here again, when it comes to prophecy, keep your feet planted. Don't sell your house, go live on a hillside. That's not the way you do it. Jesus said, "Occupy till I come." We keep doing the things that we need to do and serving the Lord while we're here, trying to do the best we can to have the biggest impact that we can for righteousness' sake, trying to do something for the cause of Christ. And that's what we want to do. And so this pastor that was so wound up that he lost his temper when I mentioned it was an interesting day, I hope that maybe he can find some peace and sanctity in that, accepting that the presidential election, the turnout and God allowed it, so it was in fact, it was the will of God that Donald Trump be president again. And so God didn't allow Donald Trump to be shot. And once that happened, in the back of my mind, I was just wondering, as we came up to election day, if that was not an indicator of the direction of the election. And it certainly was. And then just what was also interesting, and just prior to that, Kamala Harris, like a week beforehand, she's making statements like, when somebody says Jesus is Lord, and she says, you're at the wrong rally. Just kind of an indicator. Well, Jesus is Lord. Jesus is Lord. And it was his will that Donald Trump is president. So that's it for Politics, the Pulpit, and the Pew for November 13th, 2024. If you want to tune in next week, we'll have some more stuff. I am going to be talking more again about the woke agenda. And it seems like there's a guy that's going to be in one of the cabinet positions overseeing the military. And here's what's really interesting. He's going to try to eliminate some of the women in combat. He's even made comments about that, and some of the woke agenda. He's really going to try to level that playing field. So anyways, it's going to be interesting. There will definitely be some fireworks that come from that. So, but anyways, God bless. Have a great day. See you next time.